Welcome today, one of the System Design Interview Guide. Today, we're tackling the most important thing you need to learn before anything else, the framework. This is the step-by-step approach that separates candidates who get offers from those who don't. Let's dive in. Before we get into the technical stuff, let me give you an analogy that makes this whole thing click. Imagine someone asks you to design a restaurant that serves 10,000 customers a day. You wouldn't just say, build a big kitchen, right? You'd start asking questions. What kind of food are we serving? Is it dine-in or takeaway? What's the budget? When are the peak hours? These map directly to system design concepts, requirements, use cases, constraints, and traffic patterns. System design interviews work exactly the same way. You're handed a vague, open-ended problem, and your job is to turn it into a concrete, scalable architecture while thinking out loud the entire time. The interviewer doesn't expect a perfect answer. They want to see how you think. All right, so what does a system design interview actually look like? Let's break down the format. A typical system design interview is 45 minutes. You'll spend the first 5 minutes gathering requirements and defining scope. Then 15 minutes sketching out the high-level design. Think clients, servers, databases, and caches. The bulk of the time, about 20 minutes, goes into a deep dive on 2 or 3 critical components. And you'll wrap up in the last 5 minutes discussing bottlenecks and improvements. Now here's what interviewers are actually scoring you on. There are 5 key signals. Can you break down an ambiguous problem? Do you weigh trade-offs instead of just picking one option? Can you go deep on at least a couple of components? Are you communicating your thought process clearly? And are you thinking about scalability, bottlenecks, and what happens when things fail? This brings us to the most important part of today's lesson, the 4-step framework. Memorize this. Use it in every single interview. Step 1 is requirements gathering, and you should spend about 5 minutes here. There are 2 types. Functional requirements describe what the system should do, like users should be able to post tweets and see a news feed. Non-functional requirements describe how well it should perform. Sub, 200 millisecond latency, for 9s of availability, eventual consistency for the feed, and the ability to handle 500 million users at 100,000 tweets per second. Here's a pro tip. Never skip this step. The number 1 mistake candidates make is jumping straight into drawing boxes on a whiteboard without asking a single clarifying question. That's an instant red flag for interviewers. Part of requirements gathering is doing back-of-the-envelope math. Here's an example for Twitter. If 1% of 500 million users tweet daily, that's 5 million tweets. Each tweet is about 560 bytes of text, 200 bytes of metadata, and roughly 500 kilobytes of media on average. Multiply it out, and you're looking at about 2.5 terabytes per day, or around 900 terabytes per year. Interviewers love when you can do this kind of estimation on the fly. Step 2 is the high-level design, and this gets about 15 minutes. This is where you draw the big picture. Start with the basics. Clients talking to a load balancer, which distributes traffic to your application servers, which talk to your database. Then layer in additional components like a cache for hot data, a CDN for static content, and a message queue for asynchronous processing. Step 3 is the deep dive, and this is where you really shine. You'll spend about 20 minutes going deep on 2 or 3 components. Common areas include your database schema design, your caching strategy, how you partition the data across multiple servers, and critically, how the system handles failures. This is where your technical depth shows. And step 4 is the wrap-up. In the last 5 minutes, identify the bottlenecks in your design. Talk about how you'd monitor the system with logging and alerting, and mention future improvements you'd make if you had more time. This shows the interviewer you think beyond just getting it working. Now let me give you some golden phrases you can actually use in the interview. These are the kinds of things that make interviewers nod approvingly. Here's a great opener. Before I jump into the design, let me clarify the requirements. Are we designing for read-heavy or write-heavy traffic? This immediately tells the interviewer you know what you're doing. Another strong move. Let me do a quick back-of-the-envelope estimation to understand the scale we're dealing with. This shows you think quantitatively, not just in abstract terms. You can also say, I'll start with a high-level architecture, and then we can deep dive into the components you'd like to explore. This gives the interviewer a roadmap of where you're heading and invites their input. And perhaps the most powerful phrase, the trade-off here is between X and Y. For this use case, I'd lean towards X because this single sentence demonstrates trade-off analysis, which is one of the top signals interviewers are looking for. Now, just as important as knowing what to say is knowing what not to do. These are the common mistakes that kill your interview. Mistake number 1, jumping straight into the solution without asking a single question. Mistake number 2, over-engineering. Don't design for Google scale when the problem says startup with 10,000 users. Number 3, and this is huge, silence. Always think out loud. The interviewer cannot evaluate what they cannot hear. Number 4, tunnel vision. Always mention alternatives and explain why you chose one over another. And finally, don't ignore non-functional requirements. Latency, availability, and consistency matter just as much as features. Let me show you what this looks like in practice with a real example. The interviewer says, design a URL shortening service like tinyURL. A bad response is, okay, I'll use a database to store URLs and generate short codes. That's it, you're done, you've failed. A great response starts with questions. What's the expected scale? How many URLs per day? Do we need analytics like click tracking? Should URLs expire? What's more important, low latency reads or write consistency? Then you'd continue. Based on typical requirements, if we have 100 million new URLs per day, that's about 1,200 writes per second. Reads will be much higher, maybe a 10-to-1 ratio, so about 12,000 reads per second. Let me start with a high-level design. See the difference? That's the framework in action. Before we wrap up, here's your checklist for today. For things to take away from today, first, memorize the 4-step framework, requirements, high-level design, deep dive, and wrap up. Second, practice your back-of-the-envelope math, especially powers of 2 and common latency numbers. Third, always start with requirements. Never skip this step. And fourth, think out loud. Silence is your enemy in a system design interview. And that's a wrap for day 1. You now have the foundational framework that every top candidate uses. Tomorrow in day 2, we'll dive into scalability, vertical versus horizontal scaling, and why stateless services are the key to handling millions of users. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss it. See you tomorrow.